2 off in case.
Probably. Do both of y'all have it?
No, we have it.
Yeah. Christian. Judge, we're ready. Sorry. First off is a framework. Interpretation of the affirmative must defend instrumental passage of a topical policy action. B, violation. The 1AC lacks definitive policy course of action through affirmation of the resolution. And C, reasons to prefer. 1, preservation of debate, most real world, Budget 83. It is impossible to manipulate the masses by any way. All manipulation gets sucked into the mass and distorted and reversibilized. It is impossible to know where it goes, and the mass brings the same situation to the field of social, no longer objectifiable. It annuls any subject that would claim to comprehend it in any discipline. The clear objective inquiry only allows for the circular truth in which every object aimed is excluded. According to the same procedures, the masses and social begins and sends back the same signals of the same code of responses and the same endless conformity. The medium alone functions as atmospheric and aspectal of fascination. The masses do not choose and they do not produce difference. They retain a fascination for the medium in which they prefer. Fascination does not depend on the meaning of the disaffection of the meaning. It is possible to communicate outside of the medium of meaning, and not by some death drive which implies lifestyle outside of the meaning, but quite simply by defiance and the analogy to reference in the message from the code and very linguistic experience. None of the guardians of meaning can understand this. The political only strives by namely the masses that are permeable to action and discourse, and they hold opinion as the political class and belief that it speaks and is politically heard. The people have to become a public. Resistance to the social has progressed for even more rapidly than the social. The masses accept everything and redirect into as spectacular without meaning, without resistance. Everything slides into in which is not even a nonsense, but that of that manipulation. Let it not be said that this profits the system, for a system does not does well out of this game and encourages, and it does not. The main thing that this indicates is the end of the economic cutoff from the rational definitions. Youth resistant to all pedagogies, future revolutions will be claimed to liberate them. There is no liberation, a system which abolished only by forcing into an excessive practice. If you want us to consume, okay, let's consume, always more, and anything whatsoever for any useless and absurd purpose. 2, education. The brain is not limitless, it's a market, it's an economy. The infosphere has been completely overloaded. Their narrative is an attempt, their eulogy is an attempt to inject meaning into a system that necessarily destroys just that, meaning Biffo 11. Modern radical thought has always been seen as the process of subjectification and energetic mobilization and social desire and political activism, expression and participation by the modes of conscious collective energy is running out, and the desire of which have been given soul of modern social dynamics is absorbed into the black hole of virtualization. Today the whole system is swamped by interdependency, and every reality is absorbed by the hyper-reality of the coded simulation. The brain is the market. The brain cannot expand and accelerate indefinitely. The prolif of simulacra in the infosphere has saturated the space of attention and imagination. Advertising has submitted to the energies into permanent mobilization. The exhaustion is the only way to escape. Nothing, not even the system, can avoid the symbolic obligation. The system must itself commit suicide in response to the challenge of the death and suicide. So hostages are taken from which every moral consideration. Victims is ruled out of the hostage as a substitute. No need for destructive instincts for even of the perversive unintended effects. The West has become suicidal. Exhaustion has been seen as an inability body to escape the vicious destiny that capitalism has prepared. Exhaustion would have become civilization based on the withdrawal and furable expectations of life in consumption. Radicalism could abandon activism and adopt the mode of passivity. A radical passivity would threaten the ethos of relentless productivity and neoliberal politics has imposed. The world bubble would finally deflate and we have working too much and outrageously too much during the last 30 years. It is possibly only if we start from exhaustion, if we emphasize the creative side of withdrawal and the exchange between life and money has been deserted, the exhaustion could give way to a huge wave of withdrawal and a new refrain could emerge from that moment, a wipeout of economic growth and the general intellect could abandon the law of accumulation and growth. Voters for the reasons above. Next off. Ghosts haunt us. Creeping along to Halloween, they're starting to really spring about. They haunt our graveyards, our homes, our spaces, our minds, and our ideas. These ghosts have always been here. They are always a result of an improper burial. We must recognize the ghosts of ideology before we can bury the body. Here's why. The attempt to banish the ghost causes war and totalitarianism, and it means that violent ideologies never get resolved. Turns case Derrida 6. States of old Europe in general have become the responsible, frightened, and ruthless wars. The only in the course of the war, the Leninism and then Stalinist totalitarianism were able to constitute themselves, harm themselves monstrously into their cadaverous rigor. Between Stirner and Marx, we will get around to this essentially ineluctable by the reflexive reflex and make oneself fear of the experience of the ghost. It is as if Marx and Marxism had run away, fled from themselves, and have scared themselves in the course of the same chase and the same persecution of the same imperial pursuit. It is better to know that in a world of the whole history of European politics as at least since Marx would have been a ruthless war between solidarity camps that are equality terrorized by the ghost and the ghost of the other, and its own ghost by the ghost of the other. The Holy Alliance is terrorized by the ghost of communism and undertakes a war against it that is still going on, but it is a war against a camp in itself organized by a terror of the ghost and the one that is in line of it and the one that carries within itself. And ideology does not disappear just because we want it to. Violence and sexism will only become more evil and insidious. The alt is the only way to resolve Baudrillard 93. Where did evil go? The answer is everywhere. The amorphous of modern forms of evil knows no bounds, annihilating its natural reference by whitewashing violence and performing cosmetic surgery on the negative, and to concern itself solely with quantified magnet with the discourse of the good. Society where it no longer is possible to speak evil, evil has metamorphosized into a viral and terroristic forms of the abscess via fundamental differences will never resolve themselves. All forms of violent otherness has been incorporated into a discourse of different, which simultaneously implies inclusion and exclusion, recognition and discrimination. Madness, his exclusionary status has been revoked and he's caught up in a far subtler toils of psychology. And don't get it wrong, this is not about us, nor is it about you. The central question of ethics should be a specter. We should direct our ethics towards the other that is not of the present. In a word, let's listen to these ghosts. Derrida 6. If I'm getting ready to speak at the length about ghosts, inheritance, and generations of ghosts, it is in the name of justice where it is not yet there, where it is no longer. Let us stand there, where it is no longer present, and where it will never be. No more than the law, reducible to law of the rights, no justice. Let us not say law. And once again, we are not speaking out of law. It seems impossible or thinkable without the principle of some responsibility beyond that all living present within the which disjoins the living person before the ghosts of those who are not yet born, who are already dead, be the victims of wars, political and other kinds of violence, nationalist, racist, colonial, sexist, and other kinds of extermination victims, well, the oppression of capitalist imperialism, from the forms of totalitarianism. Within this responsibility of this respect for the justice concerning those who are not there, for those who are no longer, who are not yet present or living, in the sense that there will be a question of where tomorrow, whither, on the case. The ethical framework creates a tyranny of the self, the worst kind of slavery that breeds political fascists by enslaving life to itself. Baudrillard 1. They disobey the moral rules and its freedom, but they disobey oneself by the highest of freedom. Obeying the one's will is worse than being enslaved by the passions. Those who submit to their own decisions fill the authoritarian ranks, which days is more subtle than the worst than which ones in the preceded. The individual possesses the will, but is no longer free in respect to the automatic agent of faculty, the surface of master, and the evocation of rape and sexual violence in academic spaces recreates violence by mapping violent and traumatic identities into bodies, in which turns case, Marston Act 10. Neither can we forget that the women who were told that they no longer had names symbolically stripped of their identities because they became female bodies available for the heterosexual tortures, as if these women painfully claimed the terrible truth of rape and torture is hidden from the female body, and the violated body carries the truth inside for trauma of war, rape, and torture is mirrored in the subsequent violence generated by its representation. That is the stereotype assumption that these stories need to be heard for the public and that they should be told so that the truth can be exposed. But the approach to the classroom of representation also carries violence. Violence is engendered with the representation. How can students and teachers become critical witnesses to trauma and oppression? I understand the effectiveness possibilities of performing And yet I want to ask this thorny question because it can have profound consequences in the classroom. And effective representations of suffering lock bodies into violent humanist subjectives view only in terms of pity, recreating the cycle.
Yeah, don't worry about that.
Never mind.
That's
I'm gonna scratch that. And that's time. I stand ready for process.
Okay. Good. How does your interpretation on framework interact with Baudrillard?
What we talk about is that you have to act within the state. So it just pretty much says that role playing is good in terms of.
How does
like,
it not contradict with Baudrillard?
No, the Baudrillard argument that we isolate isn't probably simulation that you're trying to talk about. What we isolate is that the state will destroy you if you try to go against it. So the only way we can actually resist the state is acting within it. Therefore, we can take away the actual fundamental assumptions of the state, take away its power, and destroy it from within. You can't destroy it from the outside. They have more guns than you. They have more lawyers than you. You will be destroyed.
Who said we were trying to take down the state?
You're definitely trying to take down some kind of norm that is.
We said in this debate space.
Right, which is
To have fun with the
constituted against you
PRL.
by what? Some kind of power structure, right? I.e. the state.
Yeah, and the reason why all your impacts happen, we'll argue, with the Baudrillard stuff is because of things in the real world. You can't solve for anything in the real world if you don't resist what's causing them.
Okay. Okay. Who are the ghosts?
The ghosts. They're the ghosts of ideologies buried in the past. Any kind of
What have ideologies been buried in the past?
A lot. Civil rights movement, we immediately assumed that we solve for racism, but police brutality still exists.
Okay.
That's
What
the
does it
idea
mean
of
to
ghosts.
listen to the ghosts?
So the argument is that before we can even move on to anything is that we have to understand that first of all we have to recognize that these ghosts exist, which is already going to be obviously a tough job. But to
Do
understand,
you recognize that they exist?
yes, we have to recognize, and then further we have to understand these ghosts.
How do you
Which means-
understand them?
Well, you have to dive into what the ideology was, why it was buried, why
So,
people think that it's buried.
If ghosts are what does it mean when you say they are ghosts of ideologies in the past? What does that mean? Are those ideologies still present?
They're still present in a different form, in an invisible
Can you give
form
me an
that we
example?
do not blatantly. The new racism.
Okay. So what happens if we bury the new racism as well?
It comes back.
It comes back into a new racism.
Yeah,
That's
okay.
the problem. Is that we're only going to re-entrench ourselves into, and we're only going to perpetuate any kind of violence.
Okay,
that
so we
didn't
just
see
shouldn't
coming
do
in the first
anything
place.
for
No.
these structural issues that we see.
No, that's
That is
not
not
what
what we're saying at all.
Then what should we do?
We're saying that we are trying to address these ideologies, that are being buried, but we have to address them. Obviously, we can't just.
burying
So
them.
just give me an example. What would y'all do to deal with these structures?
We find the fundamental root causes of them. We figure out why they're happening.
How
We
is
find
that
better
any
solutions.
different than
'Cause,
saying
no,
that-
just burying them
What's the link?
to it.
Yeah.
Yeah, you just bury things. It's the idea of just burying our
You
ghosts.
don't
That's the
tackle a
entire
real
beginning of it.
ideology. You don't tackle a real problem.
You just in around shit happens. So bury it.
Yep, sorry, no.